I always thought that if something like this ever happened to me, I'd know right away. I wouldn't be one of those clueless husbands who walked around smiling like an idiot while his wife was off betraying him. I believed I had good instincts, that I could read people, especially the woman I'd spent more than a decade with. But looking back, I realize now how blind I was, how much I ignored, how the truth was sitting right in front of me, practically screaming in my face, and I just brushed it off as paranoia. The night I finally saw it, really saw it, was the night I walked into my own home and felt like a guest in my own life. It was late, just past midnight, when I pulled into the driveway. I had just gotten back from a work trip, one of those last-minute client meetings that required me to be out of town for a couple of days. Normally, I'd call Laura to let her know I was on my way, but something stopped me this time. Maybe it was the way she barely responded to my messages earlier, or the fact that she didn't even call to ask how the trip was going. Either way, I decided to just come home without warning, a decision that changed everything. As I stepped through the front door, the house was dark except for a dim light coming from the kitchen. The living room was untouched, the TV off, no sign of Laura waiting up for me like she used to. At first, I thought she had just gone to bed early, but as I moved further in, I heard something, a faint shuffle, almost like footsteps, then a soft giggle. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't Noah. He was at my parents' for the weekend. My grip tightened on my suitcase handle as I made my way toward the sound. The kitchen light was on, but the voices weren't coming from there. They were coming from the patio. I moved slowly, carefully, my pulse hammering in my ears as I stepped toward the sliding glass door. The curtains were partially drawn, just enough for me to see outside without being seen. What I saw made my stomach drop. Laura was out there, sitting on the outdoor couch, her back to me. But she wasn't alone. A man sat next to her close, too close. His hand rested on her thigh as they talked in hushed voices. And then, before I could even process what I was seeing, she leaned into him, her fingers lightly grazing his arm as she laughed at something he said. For a few seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind tried to convince me I was misunderstanding, that there was some kind of explanation. But the way she touched him, the way she looked at him, it was all too familiar. It was the way she used to look at me. I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the edge of the curtain, my heart slamming against my ribs. Every logical part of my brain told me to storm out there, to demand answers, to make a scene. But something held me back. I needed to hear it, to know for sure. Then she spoke. "You always know how to make me feel special," she said, her voice soft, intimate, nothing like the distant tone she had been using with me for months. The man chuckled, his fingers tracing circles on her knee. "Because you are Laura, you deserve more than what you have." I felt the air leave my lungs. I had suspected deep down that something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed like this, seeing it unfold right in front of me, was like being punched in the gut. My wife, the woman I had built a life with, was sitting on our patio in the middle of the night, letting another man touch her, whispering to him like I didn't even exist. My fingers curled into fists, nails digging into my palms as a cold, unfamiliar rage took over. This wasn't just some flirtation. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. She was comfortable with him, trusting, leaning into his touch like she had done it 100 times before. I wanted to burst through that door, to rip him away from her, to demand to know who the hell he was and how long this had been going on. But instead, I forced myself to step back, to steady my breathing, to think. She didn't know I was home yet. She thought she was safe, and that meant I still had the upper hand. I stepped back from the curtain, my breathing controlled, but my heart slamming against my ribs. I wasn't going to barge in like some idiot screaming at his wife and her secret lover. That would give them too much power. If I wanted to know the truth, the real truth, I had to play this smart. I slipped my shoes off, moving silently as I backed away from the patio door and into the shadows of the kitchen. I had spent years working construction sites, navigating half-built structures with nothing but a flashlight and instinct. Walking through my own home without making a sound was easy. I leaned against the kitchen counter, forcing myself to listen, to absorb every disgusting word coming from my wife's mouth. She sighed, the kind of sigh that used to come after we had spent an entire day together. Just the two of us, no stress, no responsibilities, just the kind of easy comfort that only comes from knowing someone for years. Now, she was giving it to him. I hate sneaking around like this, she said, her voice carrying just enough regret to make my stomach twist. But I can't just leave yet. His voice was lower, calm, confident. He wasn't nervous. That meant this had been going on for a while. I know, he said, fingers tracing circles on her knee. But you will. It's only a matter of time. I clenched my jaw so tight it hurt. He was sure of himself, sure of her, sure that whatever was happening between them wasn't just some passing fling. My wife, the woman who used to tell me I was her home, was already planning to burn everything down and step into something new. Laura leaned into him, and I caught a glimpse of her face through the small gap in the curtain. She looked content, not guilty, not anxious, just at ease, like sitting there with him was the most natural thing in the world. I don't want to hurt him, she said, and I almost laughed at the ridiculousness of it. It's just complicated. Complicated. That's what she called it. Not betrayal, not selfishness, just some inconvenience she had to tiptoe around while she figured out what she wanted. He squeezed her thigh. You don't have to explain, babe. I know you love him in your own way. But love changes. You're not happy with him. That's what matters. My fingers dug into the edge of the counter. Love changes. That's what mattered. I wanted to walk out there and ask him what kind of twisted logic that was. What gave him the right to decide what mattered. But I kept my distance, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to stay in control. I wasn't going to let them dictate how this night ended. Laura exhaled, leaning her head against his shoulder. I just need more time, she whispered. He's a good man. He doesn't deserve this. I had heard enough. I stepped away from the kitchen, moving swiftly toward the stairs, my mind racing through every interaction over the past few months, every cold look, every forced smile. Every night she turned away from me in bed. She had already checked out, already decided she was done, but she didn't have the decency to tell me. She was waiting until it was convenient for her, waiting until she could move from me to him without having to deal with any real consequences. I reached our bedroom, closing the door behind me, my hands shaking as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I wasn't going to let her control how this played out. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for the moment she deemed acceptable to break apart our family. If she wanted to lie, if she wanted to sneak around behind my back while pretending to be my wife, then fine. But she wasn't going to walk away clean. I scrolled through my contacts, finding the number I never thought I'd have to use. My cousin, Jason, was a divorce attorney. A damn good one. I had listened to him talk about cases at family gatherings, watched as he ripped apart men who walked into his office unprepared for the war their wives were about to wage. I had never imagined myself in that position, never thought I'd need someone like him on my side. But now, there was no hesitation. I hit call. Jason answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. Eric, it's past midnight. What's going on? I stared at the bedroom door, hearing the distant hum of their conversation downstairs. I need a lawyer, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. A good one. There was a pause, then the sound of sheets rustling as he sat up. What happened? She's cheating, I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Right now, on our patio. Jason swore under his breath. Are you sure? I just listened to them talk about their future together, I said, forcing a bitter laugh. So yeah, I'm pretty damn sure. Jason's voice shifted, turning sharp professional. Do you want to confront her tonight? I looked at my reflection in the mirror across the room. My face was set, unreadable. No, I said, surprising myself. I want to make sure she doesn't see this coming. Jason let out a low breath. All right, then here's what you need to do. You keep your mouth shut. You don't let her know you know. I'll set up a meeting for tomorrow. We'll go over everything. Do you have access to financial records? Joint accounts. All of it, I said, my mind already moving ahead. Good, Jason said. Start pulling copies. Don't do anything that'll tip her off. Just act normal. Let her think she's still in control. That part would be the hardest. Pretending. Smiling. Letting her kiss me on the cheek like she wasn't giving herself to someone else behind my back. But I would do it, because she wasn't going to win. Geese on sight. I'm sorry, man. I really am. I swallowed, down the lump in my throat. Yeah, I said. Me too. I hung up, tossing my phone onto the dresser before sinking down onto the bed. I could still hear the faint sound of her laughter downstairs. But now, it didn't cut me the same way. Now it fueled me. The next morning, I woke up before Laura. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing beside me like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I had spent half the night gathering documents, logging into our joint accounts, taking screenshots of anything that might be useful later. I made copies of the mortgage statements, bank transactions, and the credit card statements that showed all the little purchases she had been making that didn't add up. I didn't know if she was spending money on him, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I wasn't just going to sit back and let her play me for a fool. If she wanted out, she was going to pay for it. I got up quietly, went downstairs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. Jason had texted me early, confirming our meeting for later that day. Everything inside me was screaming to wake her up, to grab her by the shoulders and force her to admit everything right then and there, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to do this right. Laura walked into the kitchen about 30 minutes later, stretching, looking relaxed, like she hadn't spent the night on our patio with another man. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. "You're up early," she said, glancing at me over her mug. I looked at her, really looked at her, trying to understand how she could act so normal, how she could sit there drinking coffee like she wasn't actively destroying our marriage behind my back. "Couldn't sleep," I said, keeping my voice even. She nodded, barely paying attention. "Did your work trip go okay?" I almost laughed. She was playing her part so well, pretending like she cared, like she was still my wife in more than just name. I set my coffee down and folded my hands on the table. "Who is he?" The words hit the air like a gunshot, cutting through the quiet hum of the morning. Laura's entire body stiffened, her fingers tightening around her phone before she slowly looked up at me. "What?" I didn't repeat myself. I just sat there waiting, watching. She hesitated for half a second too long, then forced a laugh, shaking her head. "What are you talking about?" "I was here last night," I said, my voice calm, controlled. "I got home early. I saw you on the patio with him." Her face went pale, her grip on the coffee mug tightening as she processed the fact that she had been caught. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, scrambling to find a way out, to come up with some excuse, some lie that could undo what I had just said. "That wasn't," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't insult me, Laura." I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locked on hers. "I heard everything. I know how long this has been going on. I know you're waiting for the right time to leave, for everything to line up so you can walk away clean. But that's not how this is going to work." She swallowed hard, setting her mug down, her hands shaking slightly now. "Eric, please, let's just talk about this." I let out a breath, forcing myself to stay composed, to not let the rage boiling in my chest take over. "Talk. Now you want to talk? Where was this conversation when you decided to start sneaking around behind my back?" Her eyes filled with something, guilt, regret, maybe just fear that she had finally lost control of the situation. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I laughed, shaking my head. "That's the best you've got? You didn't mean for this to happen? You didn't trip and fall onto him, Laura. You made a choice." Over and over again, tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't in the mood for her dramatics. "Eric, don't," I snapped. "Don't sit there and act like you care about how this makes me feel. If you cared, you wouldn't have done it in the first place." She pressed her lips together, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "I was unhappy. That did it." That one sentence, thrown out so casually, as if it justified everything, as if it erased every lie, every betrayal, every moment of humiliation she had put me through. I slammed my hand down on the table, making her jump. "You were unhappy, so you decided to fuck around instead of talking to me about it? You were unhappy, so you decided to turn me into a joke, to make a fool out of me." She flinched, her face crumbling, but I didn't care. She didn't get to cry. She didn't get to play the victim in the mess she created. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. I stared at her, my chest heaving with the effort to keep myself from losing control. "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You did. Silence filled the kitchen, thick and suffocating. Laura wiped at her eyes, trying to pull herself together, but I wasn't done. "You need to pack a bag," I said, my voice hard. "You're leaving." She blinked, like she hadn't considered that this could happen, like she had convinced herself that she would still get to control how this ended. "Eric, please, let's just—" "No," I interrupted. "You made your choice, Laura. Now I'm making mine." Her mouth opened, then closed, her entire body trembling now. "I don't have anywhere to go." I stood up, looking down at her, my heart pounding. "That's not my problem." For the first time since this started, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of losing the safety net she had always taken for granted. She had assumed she could have it all. Me, him, the comfortable transition from one life to another without any consequences. But she was wrong. I walked past her, grabbing my keys off the counter. "You have an hour." She turned, staring at me, panic creeping into her expression. "Eric, please." I didn't look back. I walked out the door, leaving her standing there, her carefully built lies crashing down around her. I didn't go far. I sat in my truck at the end of the street, watching the house in my side mirror, waiting to see if she would actually leave. I wasn't stupid. I knew Laura, knew the way she thought, the way she manipulated situations to benefit herself. She was probably inside right now, pacing back and forth, trying to figure out if I was bluffing, if I was angry enough to follow through. She had spent years perfecting the art of getting what she wanted without making it seem like she was the one pulling the strings. But this time, she had no control. That was my advantage, and I wasn't about to let it slip. 20 minutes passed before I saw movement. Laura stepped out, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her face a mess of frustration and barely concealed panic. She stood on the porch for a moment, looking around like she was hoping I'd still be there to stop her, to change my mind. I gripped the steering wheel, my jaw tightening as I watched her finally start moving toward her car. She wasn't calling the guy. That meant she wasn't ready to crawl to him yet. Wasn't sure if he was willing to take her in now that everything was out in the open. I took some satisfaction in that. As soon as she drove off, I headed back home. I wasn't planning on sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I had work to do. The first thing I did was change every password. The bank accounts, the streaming services, the insurance, everything that had both our names attached to it. Laura wasn't going to have easy access to anything while she figured out her next move. I went through the closet and started making a pile of everything that belonged to her. Clothes, shoes, random beauty products she had left scattered around. I didn't touch anything that belonged to Noah because he was the only part of this mess that actually mattered. An hour later, Jason arrived, dressed casually, but with a look that told me he was already treating this like a courtroom battle. He set his laptop down on the kitchen table and pulled out a notepad. "Did she leave?" "She's gone," I said, tossing another pair of her shoes into the pile by the door. Jason nodded, clicking his pen. "Good. That makes things easier. We need to get a full list of assets, anything joint, anything she might try to claim later. I've already got someone looking into her financials to see if she's been stashing anything away for this." "She won't have much," I muttered, sitting across from him. "She barely handles the bills. I doubt she's been planning that far ahead." Jason leaned back, tapping the notepad. "Maybe not, but she's going to fight for something. They always do." I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over my face. She told him she wasn't leaving me yet. She wanted to wait until it was the right time. Jason scoffed. "They always think they have more time than they do. You did the right thing, getting ahead of it. Now, we make sure she doesn't get to walk away from this clean." That was the part one was most interested in. Laura thought she had it all figured out, thought she could drag this out for as long as she needed before making a smooth transition into her new life. I wasn't about to let that happen. Jason started going through the paperwork I had gathered, highlighting the important pieces, setting aside the things he needed to follow up on. I wasn't paying attention to most of it. I was thinking about Noah, about what I was going to tell him. He was too young to understand the depth of what was happening, but he was old enough to notice when his mother was suddenly gone. I wasn't going to be the one to lie to him, but I wasn't going to turn this into some dramatic sob story either. Jason must have noticed my expression because he closed his laptop and leaned forward. "What's the plan with Noah?" I sighed. "I don't know yet. He's at my parents' right now. I need to figure out how to explain it to him. Jason nodded. That's the hardest part. But you'll handle it. I didn't respond. I knew I had to handle it. There wasn't another option. Jason tapped the papers on the table. All right, next step. We're filing immediately. No waiting, no negotiations. I'll have the paperwork ready by the end of the day. If she wants to fight, let her. I stared at him for a moment, then nodded. File it. Jason smirked. Good. Now, one more thing. Do you want this to stay private? Or do you want her to feel it? I looked at him, my grip tightening around my coffee mug. What do you have in mind? Jason leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. I've got some friends in town, people who know people. We can make sure that word gets around about what she's been up to. Let her deal with the fallout. No direct attacks, nothing that can backfire, just letting the right people know. I considered it. Laura had spent years cultivating this image of herself, this picture-perfect wife and mother who had everything under control. She cared what people thought, cared about how she was perceived. If Jason spread the truth in the right places, she wouldn't be able to escape the shame of it. I didn't hesitate. Do it. Jason grinned, nodding as he pulled out his phone. Consider handled. As he started making calls, I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the morning settle in. Laura had made her choices, and now she was going to face the consequences. This wasn't about revenge. This was about making sure she understood exactly what she had thrown away. I stood up, grabbing the pile of her things and hauling them to the front porch. She could come back for them if she wanted, but she wasn't stepping foot inside this house again. Let her figure out where she belonged now. It wasn't here. Laura didn't come back that night. She didn't text, didn't call, didn't ask about Noah. That told me everything I needed to know. She was too busy figuring out what to do next, too caught up in the mess she had created to deal with the reality of it. That was fine. I wasn't sitting around waiting for her to explain herself. The divorce was being filed, her things were packed, and the story of her affair was already making its way through the right circles. Jason had made sure of that. By morning, she would wake up to a life that no longer belonged to her, and there was nothing she could do about it. The next day, I went to pick up Noah from my parents' house. My mother had already figured out that something was wrong, but she didn't press me on it. She just handed me a cup of coffee, sat across from me at the kitchen table, and waited. I stared at the steam rising from the cup, knowing that if I told her everything, there would be no taking it back. She would never forgive Laura, would never let her near Noah without resentment leaking into every interaction. But there was no point in protecting Laura anymore. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. She cheated on me, I said finally, my voice flat. I caught her. She's gone. My mother's fingers curled around her mug, her face tightening. She left. I told her to leave. I corrected. She didn't argue. My mother inhaled sharply, then let out a slow breath. Noah doesn't know. I shook my head. Not yet. She nodded, staring at the table for a long moment before speaking again. She's not getting custody. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, solid and final. I looked at her, at the steel in her expression, and knew she was already ready to fight. She would stand in a courtroom if she had to, testify to anything that would make sure Noah stayed with me. It was comforting, in a way, to know I wasn't alone in this. I'll make sure of it, I said. My mother nodded once, then reached over and squeezed my hand. Good. Noah was excited to see me, running into my arms like I had been gone for weeks instead of a couple of days. He didn't notice the tension in the house, didn't understand why my mother was watching me so closely. He was just happy to be coming home. That happiness made my stomach twist because I knew it wouldn't last. We drove home in silence, Noah playing on his tablet in the back seat, completely unaware of the fact that his world was about to change. I still didn't know how to explain it to him, how to make him understand that his mother wasn't coming back. But I didn't have to figure it out yet, because as soon as we pulled into the driveway, Laura was waiting. She was standing on the porch, her arms crossed, her eyes bloodshot like she hadn't slept. The moment I saw her, my entire body tensed, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. Noah looked up, his face lighting up when he saw her. Mom! Before I could stop him, he unbuckled his seatbelt and threw open the door, running up the steps toward her. She caught him, hugging him tightly, closing her eyes like she was trying to hold onto something that was already slipping away. I got out of the truck, slamming the door harder than necessary. Inside, Noah. He turned, frowning. But inside, I repeated, my voice leaving no room for argument. Laura let go of him, forcing a smile. Go on, sweetheart. I'll be in soon. He hesitated, glancing between us, confused by the tension. But he listened. He walked inside, and as soon as the door closed behind him, I turned back to her. What are you doing here? Laura exhaled, running a hand through her hair. We need to talk. I leaned against the truck, crossing my arms. About what? You made your choice. It's done. She flinched. It's not that simple, Eric. It is for me. She looked away, chewing on her lip. I didn't expect you to find out like that. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, I'm sorry. Would you have preferred I found out some other way? Maybe after you packed your bags and left me a note? She swallowed, her throat working. I don't know how to fix this. You don't, I said bluntly. There's nothing to fix. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw real regret. Not just the regret of being caught, but something deeper. Maybe she hadn't really thought this through, hadn't really considered what it would feel like to stand in front of me and see the damage she had done. Do you love him? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. I nodded slowly, letting that sink in. Then go to him. She shook her head quickly, stepping forward. Eric, please. I stepped back. No. Her breath hitched. I don't want to lose Noah. That was the first honest thing she had said since she got here. I could see in her face the panic creeping in, the realization that what she had done didn't just destroy us, but could take him away from her too. You should have thought about that before, I said. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no guilt, no desire to make this easier for her. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I stared at her for a long moment, then shook my head. That's not my problem anymore. Her face crumpled. Please, Eric. I exhaled sharply, looking away for a second before meeting her eyes again. You want to be in Noah's life? Fine, but you don't get to pick and choose when it's convenient for you. If you think you're going to be some part-time mom while you figure out your new life, you're wrong. I'm filing for full custody. If you want to fight me on it, go ahead. But you won't win. She wiped at her face, her shoulders shaking. I don't want to fight. Then don't, I said. Walk away. Go be with him. Live the life you chose. But don't come back here expecting anything from me. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Laura looked at the door like she was considering going inside, like she wanted to see Noah one last time before this conversation destroyed whatever was left between us. But I didn't move. I didn't give her permission. After a long moment, she nodded, wiping her face again. Then she turned and walked away. I watched her go, waiting until she got in her car, until she drove off without looking back. Then I walked inside, locking the door behind me. Noah was sitting on the couch, looking up at me with wide eyes. Is Mom coming back? I sat down next to him, my chest tight. Not for a while, buddy. He nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. Okay. I put a hand on his back, steady and firm. But I'm here. He leaned into me, and I held on to him, knowing that whatever happened next, we were going to be okay. The house felt different now. It wasn't just that Laura was gone. It was the weight of everything she had taken with her. The silence that used to be comforting now felt unfamiliar, like the entire space had shifted into something new, something I wasn't used to yet. Noah had gone to bed without asking any more questions, but I knew they were coming. He wasn't the type of kid to accept a simple answer and let it go. Eventually, he would want to know why his mother wasn't here, why she left, why everything had changed overnight. I wasn't looking forward to that conversation, but I would have it when the time was right. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers Jason had dropped off earlier. It was straightforward, irreconcilable differences, full custody request, division of assets already accounted for. Jason had done his job well. There wasn't much Laura could fight for unless she suddenly decided to make this difficult, but I didn't think she would. She didn't have the energy for a war. She had lost the moment she walked away. My phone buzzed on the table, and for a second, I thought it might be her. But it wasn't. It was Jason. Everything good? He asked as soon as I answered. As good as it can be, I said, rubbing a hand over my face. She came by earlier. Wanted to talk. Jason scoffed. Let me guess. Regret, tears, no real accountability? Pretty much, I muttered. She said she didn't want to lose Noah. She already did, Jason said bluntly. She just doesn't know it yet. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. She won't fight me on custody. I don't think she has it in her. Maybe not now, Jason said. But give it a few months when reality settles in, when she realizes she's not the doting mother she pretended to be, when she starts missing the idea of being a parent more than the actual responsibility. That's when she'll try. I closed my eyes for a second, exhaling slowly. Then we'll be ready. Jason was quiet for a moment, then sighed. I know you don't want to hear this right now, but you're better off. I didn't respond right away. I knew he was right. I knew that whatever Laura and I had once been, it had died long before I found out about her affair. Maybe it had been dying for years, and I had just been too blind or too comfortable to see it. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. Yeah, I finally said. I know. Jason let out a low breath. All right. Well, I'll file the paperwork first thing in the morning. She should get served by the end of the week. Just be prepared for whatever comes after. Thanks, Jason. Anytime, man, he said. Try to get some sleep. I hung up and sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet, letting everything sink in. It was over. The marriage, the lies, the version of my life I'd been clinging to, it was all gone. The next few days passed in a blur. Laura didn't call, didn't text. She didn't ask to see Noah, and I didn't offer. My mother came over to help out, making sure Noah had enough distractions to keep him from asking too many questions. I went back to work, throwing myself into it with a focus I hadn't had in years. It was easier that way. It gave me something to control when everything else felt unstable. A week later, Laura finally reached out. It wasn't some emotional message begging for another chance. It was short, almost cold. Can I see Noah this weekend? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. We need to talk about that first. She read it almost instantly, but didn't reply right away. A few minutes later, my phone rang. Eric, she said, her voice careful, like she was trying not to set me off. I just want to see him. That's all. I'm not stopping you, I said, keeping my tone even. But we need to set some rules. You don't just get to come and go when it's convenient for you. She sighed, and I could hear the frustration creeping into her voice. I didn't come and go, Eric. You kicked me out. I clenched my jaw. Don't do that. Don't act like this is something that happened to you. You made your choices. She was silent for a moment, then exhaled. Fine. What do you want? I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge. If you want to be in his life, you need to prove it. No more disappearing. No more half-assed parenting. You show up, you commit, or you walk away for good. Do you really think I just walk away from my own son? She snapped. I think you already did, I said. That shut her up. I let the silence stretch, waiting for her to be the first one to speak. I'll come by Saturday, she finally said. Fine, I replied. Be here at 10. Don't be late. I hung up before she could say anything else. Saturday came, and for the first time since she left, Laura walked through the front door. Noah was excited to see her, running up and hugging her like nothing had changed. Watching them, I felt something settle inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just done. She stayed for a few hours, played with him, asked about school, pretended like everything was normal. I let her have it. Let her play the role she had abandoned. But when she left, Noah didn't cry, didn't ask when she was coming back. He just turned to me and asked if we could get ice cream. That's when I knew. He had already adjusted. Laura was his mother, but she wasn't home to him anymore. I was. That night, after Noah went to bed, I sat on the couch, staring at the divorce papers. I had been waiting for something to change, for some final moment of clarity to tell me that this was really over. But it had already come and gone. Laura had walked away, and I had let her. That was all the closure I needed. I picked up the pen, signed my name at the bottom of the page, and closed the folder. It was done.